My husband kept praising my mom's cooking until I found her lipstick in his truck. I always believed that my life was the absolute textbook definition of the comfortable American dream. My name is Clara. I am a 28-year-old graphic designer, and for the past 3 years, I lived in a quiet, beautiful, tree-lined suburb just on the outskirts of Chicago. I had married my high school sweetheart, David. He was charismatic, incredibly hardworking, and ran a successful local landscaping business that kept him busy during the spring and summer months. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the golden couple of the neighborhood. We had the perfect house with the wraparound porch, the manicured lawn, and a bright future ahead of us. For a very long time, I blindly believed in that perfection too. But looking back at it now, with eyes that have finally been forced open, I realized that the warning signs were never roaring sirens. They were quiet, subtle whispers that I deliberately chose to ignore because the truth was simply too terrifying to face. The biggest whisper in my life was my mother, Evelyn. My mom is a glamorous, fiercely independent woman in her early 50s who completely refuses to age. She dresses in high-end designer clothes, spends hours at the local country club, and maintains an air of sophistication that commands every room she walks into. After my father passed away 5 years ago from a sudden illness, she claimed the loneliness was too much to bear and moved into a beautiful house just 10 minutes away from our suburb. At first, I was genuinely thrilled to have her close to me. I thought we could build a stronger bond, go shopping together, and support each other through the grief of losing my dad. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the healthy boundaries of our relationship started to blur into something toxic. She didn't just drop by our house for occasional visits. She would walk right through our front door whenever she pleased, using the spare emergency key we had given her. She didn't just offer casual advice on our home decor. She would literally rearrange my living room furniture or replace my kitchen curtains while I was away at work, claiming she was just trying to help me elevate my style. And then, there was the highly uncomfortable way she treated my husband, David. Whenever she poured herself a glass of wine from our refrigerator without asking, she would look at me and make passive-aggressive comments. She would tell me that I was incredibly lucky to have caught a man like David, that he was a true provider, a real masculine presence, and that I needed to work harder to keep him happy. She constantly implied that I was too independent, too focused on my graphic design career, and that men like David didn't stay single or loyal for very long if they felt even slightly neglected at home. Every single comment felt like a backhanded compliment, a sharp needle pricking at my self-esteem. David, on the other hand, absolutely adored her. Whenever I would sit down with him at night and complain about how my mother was overstepping her boundaries or making me feel inadequate in my own home, he would gently pat my knee and defend her. He would tell me that she was just a lonely widow, that she had lost the love of her life, and that we were the only family she had left in the area. He would plead with me to be patient, to let her have her way because it kept her happy. I used to love David for his deep kindness and his role as the ultimate peacemaker. Now, remembering those late-night conversations makes me feel physically sick to my stomach. The true, unmitigated nightmare of my life began on a miserable, rainy Tuesday afternoon in mid-April. The sky was a heavy, dark gray, and the rain was hammering against the large glass windows of my design office. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my stomach started cramping violently and a wave of intense nausea hit me. A terrible stomach bug had been making its rounds through our office building, and it was clear that I was the next victim. I couldn't focus on my laptop screen, my head was throbbing, and all I wanted was to crawl into my own bed and sleep the illness off. Knowing David was supposed to be across town working on a large commercial property contract, I pulled out my phone and sent him a quick text message letting him know that I was feeling awful and was heading home early to rest. He didn't reply immediately, which was completely normal for him, since he was often operating loud machinery or talking to clients on job sites. I packed up my laptop bag, grabbed my trench coat, and drove through the pouring rain back to our quiet neighborhood. When I finally pulled my car into our concrete driveway, I immediately noticed something that made me pause. David's large work truck wasn't anywhere in sight, which made sense, but my mother's sleek silver Lexus was parked right under the shadow of the large oak tree near our front lawn. I found it highly unusual that she would be at my house when she knew David was at work and I was supposed to be at the office. I assumed that perhaps she had dropped off some groceries or was borrowing a specific baking dish, as she frequently did without warning. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, expecting to hear her calling out my name. Instead, the house was completely, utterly silent. The only sounds were the steady, rhythmic hum of our kitchen refrigerator and the heavy patter of the rain against the window panes. But as I took a step further into the hallway, a very specific aroma hit my senses. It was the rich, deeply savory scent of roasted garlic, rosemary, and baked cheese. It was my mother's signature homemade chicken casserole, a dish she only made for highly special occasions or holiday dinners. I called out for her, my voice sounding raspy and weak from the illness, but no one answered. I kicked off my wet shoes at the entryway and walked slowly into the kitchen, my brow furrowed in confusion. There, sitting right in the center of the kitchen island, was the large ceramic casserole dish. It was still steaming slightly, covered carefully with a layer of shiny aluminum foil. Right next to the dish sat a half-empty bottle of expensive white wine and 2 used glasses. I stepped closer, my heart performing a strange, uncomfortable flutter in my chest. One of the glasses had a very distinct faint smudge of mauve lipstick on the rim, my mother's unmistakable signature shade. The other glass, however, was a heavy crystal whiskey glass. It was a glass that belonged exclusively to David, one that he had received as a wedding gift and only used when he was relaxing after a long week. My mind began to race, frantically trying to piece together why my husband's glass was sitting on the counter next to my mother's lipstick-stained wine glass on a Tuesday afternoon when he was supposed to be miles away on a construction site. I left the kitchen and walked down the dimly lit hallway toward our master bedroom, desperately wanting to just change into comfortable sweatpants and lie down on the mattress. But as I drew closer to the heavy wooden door, the sound of muffled, hushed voices filtering through the cracks caused me to freeze completely in my tracks. Every single muscle in my body went entirely rigid. I held my breath, listening intently, praying with everything inside me that I was just imagining things due to my fever and nausea. But then, the unmistakable voice of my mother drifted through the door. She was whispering, her tone completely devoid of her usual sharp, commanding maternal edge. Instead, her voice was soft, breathless, and filled with an intimate, playful warmth that I had never heard from her before. She said that they shouldn't be doing this in our house in our bed. Before I could even process the horror of her words, my husband's voice cut through the silence of the bedroom. He laughed softly, a deep, smooth, confident sound, and told her to relax because I was stuck at my office desk for at least another 3 hours. He explicitly stated that I believed he was operating at the Oak Street commercial site until 5 o'clock in the evening. He told her she looked beautiful, and then I heard the distinct, unmistakable rustle of our cotton bedsheets, followed by a soft, content sigh from my mother. The air completely left my lungs, and the hallway suddenly felt as freezing as an Arctic winter. My hand hovered just inches away from the brass doorknob, trembling so violently that my rings made a faint clicking sound against each other. My mind desperately tried to build an innocent alibi. I tried to tell myself that they were secretly planning a massive surprise party for my upcoming 29th birthday, that they were just hiding in the room to keep a secret gift from me. I wanted so badly to believe a lie, rather than face the shattering reality of what was happening on the other side of that door. But the next sentence that came out of David's mouth completely destroyed my life, breaking my reality into a million unfixable, jagged pieces. He murmured to her that he loved how she smelled, and that he had been thinking about being with her all weekend while I was away visiting my cousin in Indiana. My mother responded by telling him that she loved him deeply, far more than I ever could, claiming that I was too emotionally cold and detached, just like my late father used to be. David agreed with her, his voice dripping with casual betrayal, stating that he was simply waiting for the absolute right time to leave me, but that they had to play their cards incredibly smart regarding the transition of their personal affairs before making a legal move. Until then, he whispered, this had to remain their beautiful little secret. My vision began to blur into a dark haze, and a loud, deafening ringing sound filled my ears, completely drowning out the sound of the rain outside. The 2 human beings I trusted with my entire soul, the mother who had raised me and the husband I had stood before an altar with, were currently entwined in my marriage bed, discussing me as if I were a mere nuisance, an obstacle to be carefully cleared out of their path. I felt a massive surge of adrenaline crash through my system. I didn't scream, I didn't burst through the door screaming and crying, and I didn't throw a frantic tantrum. A strange, eerie, and profound numbness washed over me, completely replacing my physical sickness with a cold, calculating, and hard anger. I realized instantly that if I confronted them right now, in that exact moment, they would simply scramble, cover themselves up, and spend the next 6 months gaslighting me. They would call me paranoid, tell me I misheard their conversation, and my mother would easily find a way to manipulate the rest of our extended family into thinking I had suffered a mental breakdown. I knew right then and there that I didn't just need an explanation. I needed cold, hard, undeniable, and devastating proof that would completely ruin both of them beyond any shadow of a doubt. Slowly, using every ounce of willpower in my body to control my shaking limbs, I backed away from the bedroom door on my tiptoes. I walked silently down the hallway, retrieved my car keys from the kitchen island, and carefully slipped out of the heavy front door, pulling it shut with a soft, gentle click. I climbed back into the driver's seat of my car, the pouring rain continuing to cascade down my windshield like a river of tears. But I wasn't crying. My hands had completely stabilized, and a dark survival instinct had taken full control of my brain. I pulled out my smartphone, opened the text messaging app, and completely deleted the message I had sent David earlier about leaving work early. Because his phone was likely buried under a pile of clothes or set to silent in the bedroom, he hadn't seen the notification yet. To him and to my mother, I was still sitting safely at my office desk downtown, completely oblivious to the world. I drove my car to the very end of our suburban street, parked under the shade of a large willow tree, and sat there in total silence for 2 long hours, keeping my eyes fixed entirely on our driveway. At exactly 4:15 in the afternoon, my mother's silver Lexus backed out of the driveway. Through the distance, I could see her adjusting her rearview mirror, casually checking her makeup and smoothing down her hair before driving away with absolute calmness. Exactly 10 minutes later, David's large work truck pulled out of the driveway, heading back in the direction of his landscaping office so he could clock out at his regular time and make it look like a normal, grueling day of labor. Once the coast was entirely clear, I drove back down the street and parked in my driveway for the second time that day. I walked inside, the rich scent of that deceptive chicken casserole still hanging incredibly heavy and suffocating in the air. I walked slowly into our master bedroom. The bed had been hurriedly remade. David had pulled the heavy comforter up to hide the mess, but the pillows were deeply indented, and the faint, overly sweet scent of my mother's expensive French perfume lingered over the mattress like a cloud of toxic gas. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the beige wall in front of me. The life I had spent years building was officially over. But as I looked at those rumpled sheets, a dangerous, unwavering resolve settled deep into my bones. They wanted to play a deceptive game behind my back. They wanted to wait for the perfect moment to discard me and take everything I valued. No. I was going to dictate every single rule of this game from this moment forward. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a prominent, ruthless divorce attorney downtown, asking her not just for a legal consultation, but for the immediate recommendation of a highly discreet, professional private investigator. The very next morning, I woke up feeling like an absolute stranger in my own home. David was snoring softly right beside me, his heavy arm draped carelessly over my waist. Just 24 hours prior, that arm felt like the safest place in the world. Now it felt like a venomous snake constricting around my body. I carefully lifted his weight off me, slipped quietly out of bed, and walked into the bathroom. Staring directly at my tired reflection in the mirror, I made a strict, unbreakable vow to myself. There would be no crying, no emotional breakdowns, and no weakness. Tears would not undo the ultimate betrayal they had committed. Only a brilliant strategy would save me. The private investigator I had hired, an incredibly sharp and professional woman named Sarah, had given me explicit instructions over the phone the previous night. She told me that under no circumstances was I to change my daily behavior or attitude toward David or my mother. She warned me that if either of them sensed even a fraction of suspicion from me, they would immediately go into hiding, delete all their digital messages, wipe their call logs, and gaslight me until I questioned my own sanity. She told me to let them get completely comfortable, to let them believe they were successfully fooling me because comfortable people always make massive mistakes. So I put on the performance of a lifetime. I went downstairs to the kitchen, brewed a fresh pot of dark roast coffee, and began frying eggs and bacon. When David finally walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and wearing that familiar, boyish charm that I had once fallen deeply in love with, I turned around and handed him his favorite coffee mug with a perfectly practiced, bright grin. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and asked if my stomach was feeling any better after that terrible bug. I looked him right in the eyes, swallowed the immense disgust rising in my throat, and told him that I felt 1,000,000 times better and just needed a solid night of deep sleep. He nodded happily, sat down at the breakfast bar, and began scrolling through his phone. Then, without even looking up at me, he casually mentioned that my mom had dropped off a fresh batch of her homemade chicken casserole the previous afternoon, while I was away at work because she knew I was feeling under the weather. Hearing him say those words with such calm, calculated ease made my blood run cold. He truly believed he was a criminal mastermind, using the casserole as a convenient alibi to explain why her car might have been seen by neighbors or why her presence was felt in the house. I smiled warmly at him and said it was incredibly sweet of her, and suggested that we should host a massive family Sunday dinner over the weekend to properly thank her, inviting my older brother Tom and his wife as well. David's entire face lit up with genuine excitement, and he told me it was a fantastic idea because my mother truly loved big family gatherings. Little did he know, this specific gathering would be one he would never forget. Later that Friday afternoon, while I was sitting at my office desk pretending to work on a branding layout, Sarah called my personal cell phone. She had been tracking David's movements for 3 consecutive days and had compiled a massive amount of surveillance. She informed me that during his lunch break that afternoon, David hadn't gone to his usual deli. Instead, he had driven his truck to the far edge of town, parking in the isolated lot of the local botanical gardens. Within 5 minutes, a silver Lexus had pulled up right beside him, and my mother had slipped into the passenger seat of his truck. Sarah told me they remained inside the vehicle for nearly 45 minutes. When I asked if she managed to get photographic evidence, Sarah confirmed that she had high-resolution, crystal-clear photos taken directly through the front windshield of the truck. Furthermore, she revealed that she had captured clear video footage of the two of them entering a small, secluded boutique hotel on the north side of the city the previous Thursday afternoon, a time when David had explicitly told me he was out inspecting a massive new commercial project site. She assured me that she was organizing every single photo, timestamp, and video file into a secure digital drive that would be delivered directly to my divorce attorney's office by Monday morning. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and took a deep, shaky breath. The evidence was piling up beautifully, but holding it all inside was becoming an agonizing psychological torture. On Friday evening, David and I were getting ready to go out for a casual dinner. I volunteered to clean out the front clutter of his work truck under the innocent pretense of searching for a pair of missing designer sunglasses. As I searched through the side pockets and popped open the glove compartment, my eyes caught sight of a small, shiny object tucked directly behind the thick vehicle manual. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a luxurious gold tube of high-end lipstick. I turned it over in my hand and read the label on the bottom, Mauve Twilight. It was the exact, highly specific shade of lipstick that my mother had worn exclusively for the last decade of her life. My entire body began to tremble as I stood there in the driveway, holding the physical embodiment of their utter disrespect in the palm of my hand. It was one thing to hear about their secret meetings from a private investigator, but holding this solid proof inside his truck made the anger rage within me like a wildfire. I immediately took out my phone, snapped a clear photograph of the lipstick sitting inside the glove compartment next to his registration papers, placed it back exactly where I had found it, and walked back into the house with a completely calm, unbothered expression. The trap was officially set, and the stage was perfectly prepared for the upcoming Sunday dinner. I spent the entirety of Saturday deep cleaning every single square inch of the house and preparing an elaborate, multi-course traditional roast dinner. I wanted the environment to look absolutely flawless, the quintessential picture of a blissful, successful American suburban family. My older brother Tom and his wife Sarah were the first to arrive on Sunday afternoon around 4 o'clock. Tom has always been an incredibly protective, fierce older brother, and deep down, I knew I was going to desperately need his emotional and physical support for the absolute chaos that was about to unfold at the dining table. At exactly 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother standing on the porch, looking absolutely radiant and completely unbothered by a single shred of guilt. She was wearing a stunning, cream-colored silk blouse, expensive gold jewelry, and of course, her signature mauve lipstick. David practically sprinted from the living room to the front door to greet her, eagerly taking her heavy designer coat with an exaggerated, nauseating display of chivalry and respect. She walked gracefully into the kitchen to give me a heavy hug, and the moment her arms wrapped around my shoulders, the thick, suffocating scent of her expensive French perfume filled my nose, the exact same scent that had contaminated my bedroom sheets just days prior. I forced myself to smile, welcoming her into the dining room. We all sat down at the large mahogany dining table, and for the first hour, the conversation and laughter flowed completely effortlessly. David was in high spirits, cracking jokes and talking about his business expansion plans, while Tom discussed his upcoming weekend travel arrangements. My mother, true to her nature, commanded the absolute center of attention, loudly boasting about her recent victories at the country club and her elegant lifestyle. David hung on to her every word, nodding along and smiling like a loyal puppy. To anyone else, it looked like a beautiful, tightly knit family enjoying a peaceful Sunday evening together. But to me, it felt like sitting at a table with two monsters who were actively planning to destroy my entire existence while eating the food I had cooked for them. As the main course finally came to an end, David stood up from his chair, adjusted his shirt, and raised his wine glass high into the air to make a toast. He looked around the table, his eyes lingering just a fraction of a second too long on my mother, before focusing on the rest of the room. He delivered a beautiful, eloquent speech about how incredibly grateful he was for this family, stating that he felt truly blessed to have such a supportive, hardworking wife like me and an absolutely irreplaceable, wonderful mother-in-law like Evelyn. My mother beamed with pride, raising her glass high toward him in return, their eyes locking in a disgusting moment of shared, secret understanding. I sat there quietly, watching the display, before slowly looking over at my brother Tom, and then at his wife. I stood up from my chair, picked up a silver spoon, and tapped it firmly against the side of my crystal water glass, the sharp ringing sound instantly cutting through the laughter and bringing a sudden, heavy silence over the entire room. Every single eye at the table immediately turned to look at me. The fake, pleasant smile that I had forced myself to wear for the past several days completely vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, unwavering, and lethal stare that caused David's confident grin to instantly falter. I looked directly at him and thanked him for his incredibly beautiful, touching speech. Then I looked over at my mother, who was casually sipping her wine. I announced to the entire table that since we were all currently discussing the themes of deep gratitude, family values, and hidden secrets, I actually had a massive surprise presentation for everyone in the room, especially for my mother and my husband. My mother laughed nervously, setting her wine glass down on the table with a slight clink, and told me that I was acting incredibly strange and making the atmosphere tense. I looked her dead in the eyes and asked her if she truly thought I was the one acting strange, while slowly pulling my smartphone out of my apron pocket. I turned my head toward my brother Tom, who was watching me with a deeply confused and concerned expression. I asked him to do me a massive favor, to stand up, grab the living room remote, and turn on the large smart television that sat right in the open-concept living area adjacent to our dining table. I informed the room that I had just wirelessly casted a hidden digital folder from my phone directly onto the big screen, and that I believed the entire extended family needed to view the contents together before we moved on to dessert. The moment those words left my mouth, David's face instantly lost every single drop of its color, turning a ghostly pale white. He looked over at my mother in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic. My mother's eyes widened to the size of saucers, her hands beginning to visibly tremble against the white tablecloth as Tom, looking completely bewildered but sensing the immense gravity of the situation, stood up from his chair and picked up the black television remote. The large television screen flickered to life, transitioning from a black screen into a brightly lit, high-definition photo folder. The very first image that popped up in massive, unavoidable detail was the crystal-clear photograph that Sarah had taken through the windshield of David's truck at the Botanical Gardens. It showed David and my mother passionately embracing in the front seat, their faces completely visible under the bright afternoon sun. The silence that fell over the dining room was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Nobody breathed. Tom froze entirely in place, his hand holding the remote dropping to his side as his jaw literally dropped in complete shock. His wife, Sarah, let out a loud, horrified gasp, instinctively covering her mouth with both hands. I stood at the head of the table, my hands resting firmly on the back of my chair, watching the utter destruction of their lives unfold in real time. David stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, completely unable to form a single coherent syllable. The supreme confidence he had carried just moments ago had been entirely erased, replaced by the pathetic, cowering look of a criminal who had finally run out of places to hide. My mother, however, immediately tried to do exactly what the private investigator had warned me she would do. She scrambled to her feet, her voice cracking with a high-pitched, frantic desperation, as she looked at Tom and then at me, claiming that the photo was a complete misunderstanding, that it was a fake AI-generated image meant to tear the family apart. She looked at me, her eyes wild, and told me that I was being completely insane, that David was just giving her an emotional hug because she was crying about my late father. But I didn't say a single word. I simply swiped my thumb across my phone screen, transitioning the television to the next file. A high-definition video began to play. It was the security footage from the boutique hotel, clearly showing David checking into the front desk while my mother stood right beside him, her arm wrapped tightly around his waist, giggling as he took the room key card from the clerk. The video left absolutely zero room for interpretation, zero room for lies, and zero room for gaslighting. It was the definitive, crushing proof of their ultimate betrayal. Tom turned around slowly, his face flushing a deep, angry red as he stared at David. The protective older brother instinct completely took over. Tom took a massive step toward David, his fists clenching tightly at his sides, his voice dropping into a dangerous, low growl as he demanded to know how long this had been going on behind his sister's back. David shrank back into his dining chair, putting his hands up in a pathetic attempt to defend himself, stammering that he was sorry, that it was a mistake, and that they never meant to hurt me. My mother fell back into her chair, covering her face with her hands, finally realizing that her status, her glamour, and her carefully constructed reputation within the family had been completely and permanently obliterated. I looked down at the two of them, feeling an incredible, liberating sense of power. The numbness was completely gone, replaced by the absolute certainty that I was finally free from their toxicity. I looked at David and told him that my divorce attorney already had the entire drive of evidence, and that he had exactly 20 minutes to pack a single suitcase and get out of my house before I called the police to have him removed for trespassing. I then turned to my mother, looked at her mauve lipstick one last time, and told her that she was no longer a mother to me and that she could have my leftovers because that was all David ever was. They left the house in a chaotic, humiliating rush of tears and silent panic, leaving me standing in my beautiful, quiet home, surrounded by the people who actually loved me, ready to finally start the next chapter of my life on my own terms.